Most gardeners waste one of the best soil inputs they'll ever grow by ripping it out, cursing it, and hauling it to the compost pile, or worse, the trash. They see it sting, spread, or show up where it's not supposed to, and they treat it like an enemy. The result is tired soil, weak mineral balance, and a constant dependency on fertilizer. The weed modern gardeners despise isn't a problem at all. It's a soil superfood. And once you understand what it's actually doing, you stop fighting it and start using it. If you grow food seriously and want systems that outperform products, subscribe to the Farm Logic channel. This channel is about using what already works in real gardens, raised beds, and controlled systems, not chasing inputs that fix symptoms and create new problems later. Why stinging nettle gets hated instead of studied. Stinging nettle shows up in rich soil, not poor soil. That alone should tell you something. It thrives where nitrogen is present, minerals are available, and biology is active. Gardeners see it spread aggressively and assume it's stealing nutrients. What it's actually doing is mining, concentrating, and protecting them. I used to tear nettle out on site. Once I stopped and paid attention, my fertilizer use dropped and my soil structure improved. What makes nettle different from most weeds? Nettle has an unusually deep fibrous root system that pulls calcium, magnesium, iron, silica, and nitrogen from deeper layers and locks them into soft tissue. Those nutrients don't volatilize, they don't leach, they sit there until the plant is cut. When you return nettle biomass to the soil, you're not adding fluff, you're adding concentrated minerals in a biologically available form. So, why is it that modern advice about weeds is, well, a bit backward? We're often told that weeds compete with crops, so they must be eliminated at all costs. But honestly, that's only true when they're left unmanaged. Take nettle, for example. It isn't really a competitor if you control the timing. In fact, it becomes more of a pump for nutrients. Ancient growers actually understood this quite well. They would cut nettle repeatedly and then feed it right back to the soil. These days, though, modern gardeners tend to spray or pull it and just throw away what the soil worked so hard to collect. Let me walk you through how I actually use nettle in a backyard garden. First, I cut nettle before it flowers while the stems are still soft, you know. Then I chop it roughly and lay it directly on the soil surface around heavy-feeding crops like tomatoes, squash and brassicas. I don't bury it deeply. A layer of about 3 to 5 centimeters is enough. Within just a few days, soil life pulls those nutrients down, and within weeks you'll notice the leaf color deepening and growth steadying. This method works much better than using generic green mulch because nettle decomposes fast and feeds your plants almost immediately. Now, let's talk about why nettle tea works, but only if you do it right. Nettle tea has become pretty popular, but honestly, most people brew it poorly. What I do is use about 1 kilogram of fresh nettle per 10 liters of water. Let it ferment loosely for 10 to 14 days. And then dilute the finished liquid at least 1 to 10 before applying it to the soil. Never directly to the leaves. Undiluted nettle tea can burn roots and spike nitrogen far too hard. But used correctly, it delivers those trace minerals that modern fertilizers tend to ignore. So, let's talk about how this actually changes the soil, not just the plants themselves. After just one season of consistent nettle use, I've noticed the soil tilth really improves. There's a clear increase in earthworm activity and, well, compaction goes down quite a bit. That's because nettle feeds the microbes, not just the plants. The silica content in nettle strengthens the cell walls in crops, which, helps reduce pest pressure and improves drought tolerance. Personally, I've seen fewer aphids and less fungal stress in the beds where nettle is part of the system. Now, you might wonder why raised beds respond even faster. Raised beds tend to lose minerals quickly, but nettle helps replenish them without causing salt buildup. In my own raised beds, using nettle mulch and tea has actually replaced at least half of my usual feeding schedule. Growth stays steady instead of, surging and then crashing. That's a sure sign the soil is doing the work, rather than the gardener having to constantly intervene. So what happens when you try this in hydroponic or semi-hydro systems? Pure hydro doesn't allow for raw plant matter, but nettle still has a place. I use filtered nettle extract in very low concentrations in soil-based hydro hybrids and wicking beds. It supplies trace elements and organic collators that help stabilize nutrient uptake. You're not replacing your nutrient solution, you're just improving how the plants use it. These systems become much more forgiving, especially when they're under heat stress. One common mistake, is letting nettle go to seed. This is really where people get burned. If you allow nettle to seed freely, you end up creating a management problem for yourself. The trick, honestly, is to cut early and often. When nettle is treated as a coppiced resource, it gradually weakens over time, yet still produces usable biomass. But if you treat it as an enemy, it tends to spread aggressively. Now let's talk about composting nettle. It's optional, not required. Sure, composting works, but it actually dilutes nettle's advantage. Using it fresh delivers nutrients much faster. Personally, I only compost nettle when I have an excess. Direct use just gives you quicker results and, it feeds soil life immediately. There's this myth floating around that nettle steals nitrogen from crops. In truth, nettle only competes for nitrogen when it's actively growing. Once it's cut, it gives everything back. That's the whole point, really. You're simply using it as a temporary storage unit. Crops don't care where the nutrients come from, as long as they're available when needed. What convinced me this wasn't folklore? Well, I ran side-by-side beds for multiple seasons. Same crops, same watering, same base soil. And the beds receiving nettle outperformed those that didn't in color, resilience, and yield consistency. Not just once, every season. Why does this weed scare modern gardeners? It stings, it spreads, and honestly, it ignores tidy borders. But soil doesn't care about tidy, it cares about cycles. Nettle fits the cycle perfectly if you manage it instead of fighting it. How does this change how you see weeds entirely? Well, once you understand nettle, you start noticing other indicator plants. You stop asking how to kill them and start asking what they're telling you. That shift saves time, money, and effort, and it builds soil that improves instead of degrades. If this kind of grounded, experience-tested knowledge helps you grow better food with fewer inputs, subscribe to the Farm Logic channel and share this video with someone who's still throwing away their best soil resources. Growing better food starts with understanding what the land is already offering and using it properly.